All right, we are so excited to be in part 4 of the biology of Kundalini now. With Jana Dixon, we are reading along. It is the physiology of Kundalini, and we begin with the nervous system, okay? So thank you for joining me again. I hope that you will like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's jump right in. More than half the estimated 100,000 genes in the human DNA seem to be dedicated to building and maintaining the nervous system. 100,000 genes of the DNA, okay? Within the brain, the autonomic nervous system regulates and adjusts baseline body functions and responds to external stimuli. It consists of 2 mutually inhibitory subsystems: those nerves which activate tissues, the sympathetic or arousal system, and those which slow structures down for the rest and repair, the parasympathetic or the quiescent system. So we already have been talking about these: sympathetic, parasympathetic, the arousal and the rest repair. Okay, the sympathetic is ergotropic, that is, releases energy, and the parasympathetic is trophotropic, conserving energy, okay? So one releases energy, one conserves energy. The 2 sides of our autonomic system reflects the 2 main processes in life: growth and protection. Okay, and we can think of that in terms of creation and preservation. Growth, protection, okay? Creation also has a destructive element, okay? Growth includes creation and destruction, and then protection is preservation. These 2 mechanisms cannot operate optimally at the same time. Consider our nervous system is either wired for eating, parasympathetic, or for running away from being ourselves, sympathetic. So the 2 systems generally act in opposition to each other. Yet, where dual control of an organ exists, both systems operate simultaneously, although one may be operating at a higher level of activity than the other. So any organ that requires both, all right? Energy expended in fueling defense takes away from the process of growth, because that's protective, okay? The consequent inhibition of growth reduces energy generation. The hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis mobilizes defense against threat, and when it's not activated, growth flourishes, okay? Hence, chronic stress is enervating and debilitating because we can't ever get back to growth. Thus, we see that children who grow up in stressful homes are deprived in cellular nutrition and growth, in cellular energy generation itself, and consequently in mental, emotional, social development. Okay, that's from stress in the home. Adrenal hormones constrict blood flow to the forebrain, and stress hormones repress the prefrontal cortex activity, thus diverting energy and consciousness to the hindbrain survival faculties, okay? The hyperactivity of the HPA axis and sympathetic nervous system is perhaps one of the reasons why high Kundalini activity can make us dumb, and that the excessive production of the opiates, thus the excessive production of opiates, of course. Sympathetic. We now go into sympathetic. The arousal system is the source of our fight or flight response and is connected to the adrenal glands and the amygdala. The dominant analytical mind is connected to the arousal system and reaches into our left cerebral hemisphere. It's sometimes called the ergotropic system because it releases energy in the body to react to the environment. The sympathetic system comprises of paravertebral sympathetic trunks which run up the front side of the spine from the cranial base to the coccyx, okay, all the way down. Sympathetic nerves run mostly from thoracic and lumbar region and are longer and less direct than the parasympathetic nerves, and thus their effect is more diffuse. Instead of separate ganglion for each vertebrae, certain segments collect together to form a single large ganglion, e.g. the cervical ganglion in the neck, and the stellate ganglion in the upper thoracic region, okay? That's a bunch of nerves. Connected to the ganglion are plexuses that pass to the organs. So the cardiac plexus via the stellate ganglion supplies the heart and lungs. The solar plexus is connected with the lower thoracic spinal nerves and supplies sympathetic fibers to stomach, intestine, adrenal, and other viscera. The heart is supplied by sympathetic nerves arising mainly in the neck because the heart develops initially in the cervical region and later migrates into the thoracic, taking nerves down with it. So she's talking about the various nerve plexuses, right, that run along this main nerve of the sympathetic or parasympathetic that bundles in areas and feeds the organs. So the neurotransmitter of the preganglion sympathetic neurons is acetylcholine, or ACH. That's the neurotransmitter in the brain, okay? It stimulates action portions in the prostaglandianic neurons, affecting their targets through androgenetic receptors. The neurotransmitter released by the postganglionic neurons is noradrenaline, also called norepinephrine. The action of noradrenaline on a particular gland or muscle is excitatory in some cases, inhibitory in others. At excitatory terminals, ATP may be released along with noradrenaline. The release of noradrenaline stimulates heartbeat, raises blood pressure, dilates pupils, dilates trachea and bronchi, stimulates the conversion of liver glycogen into glucose because you're getting ready to fight, right? Shunts blood away from the skin so you become white and the skeletal muscle, brain, heart, and inhibits peristalsis in the gastrointestinal tract. It's taking blood away from digestion, right? Inhibits contraction of the bladder and rectum, inhibits the immune system to save energy. So when we go into full fight or flight, that noradrenaline pumping stimulates it just gets you ready to run, right? Stimulation of the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system prepares the body for fight or flight. This emergency response is controlled by the hypothalamus and the amygdala through the HPA axis. Activation of sympathetic system is quite general because a single preganglionic neuron usually synapses with many prostaglandic neurons. The release of adrenaline from the adrenal medulla into the blood ensures that all cells of the body will be exposed to sympathetic stimulation, even if no postganglionic neurons reach them directly. So this sends a message everywhere. One important exception to activating responsive sympathetic system is that the alimentary adrenic nerves inhibit the activity of the gastrointestinal tract, while activity in the cholinaric or parasympathetic supply results in activation of gastric and intestinal systems. This is because during an adrenaline-induced fight or flight response or during demanding activity, the blood and energy is needed by the brain and muscles, leaving digestive and eliminative functions until times of rest and relaxation. But you can still like crap your pants or piss your pants because you don't have the same control over it, right? Hormones produced by the outer region of the adrenal cortex regulate the body's metabolism, blood composition, and even body shape. The inner regions produces hormones that are the body's first line of defense against stress, whether it be physical or emotional. This inner region of the adrenals is called the adrenal medulla and is considered to be part of the sympathetic nervous system. Adrenaline and norepinephrine act as neurotransmitters when they are released by neurons and as hormones when they are produced by the suprarenal glands. So those adrenaline and norepinephrine, I want to say hormones, but They can act as hormones or neurotransmitters depending on how they are released. So we're getting familiar with the nervous system first in the sympathetic and what's going on there. Now we're going to talk about the parasympathetic. Okay, so parasympathetic, or the reposing side of autonomic nervous system, promotes relaxation, sleep, growth, and repair. Completely opposite than the sympathetic, right? It's sometimes called the trophotropic system because it conserves energy. It induces endocrine glands, parts of the hypothalamus and the thalamus, and reaches into the right cerebral hemisphere. Thus, this non-dominant, holistic mind is connected with the quiescent system and involves the hypothalamus and hippocampus. After the activity of the sympathetic stimulation, the parasympathetic system reverses the changes when danger's over and returns the body functions to normal. So it's that regulation and preservation system that's like, okay, there's no more stress, like let's go back to normal, and has to reverse all of those processes, okay? The main nerves of the parasympathetic system are the 10th cranial nerves, the vagus nerve, so that's the main nerve running up the whole length of the spine. They originate in the medulla oblongata with separate branches going to heart and respiratory. And there are branches throughout the abdomen after passing through the esophageal opening of the diaphragm. Other preganglionic parasympathetic neurons also extend from the brain as well as from the sacral end of the spinal cord, so coming from both ends. The ganglia of the system are located near structures to be innervated, or actually in the walls of the organs. Therefore, the prostoganglionic fibers are much shorter than those of the sympathetic system. Okay? This is one of the reasons why sympathetic effects are usually more diffuse than parasympathetic effects. The sacral parasympathetic fibers supply the rectum, bladder, and reproductive organs. And the nerves from the two lowest ganglia enter the Kundalini gland. So there is a need for relaxation to activate this Kundalini gland. Cranial fibers run with the vagus nerve, supplying innervation to the heart, stomach, and small intestines. True parasympathetic nerves are all motor. Sensory nerves within the parasympathetic system are general visceral sensory nerves that simply run with the parasympathetic fibers and are not strictly part of the system. There is not parasympathetic supply to the limbs or the gonads. We don't run there to the limbs, okay, and to the gonads, to the reproductive glands. Acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter at all the pre and many of the post-gangliotic neurons of the parasympathetic system. However, some of the post-ganglionic neurons do release nitric oxide as their neurotransmitter. In the parasympathetic nervous system, the postganglionic neurons, ACH, or the acetylcholine, is received by the muscarinic ACH receptors. Acetylcholine opens cation channels for Na plus and Ca plus to flow, and into K plus to flow out of every cell. So Na, I'm trying to think what that is. Maybe you know. Is Ca the calcium and K is the potassium or the vitamin K? I wonder if she's got it in the back. I don't recall her mentioning these. I'm thinking that they're short for some specific nutrients. Pardon me while I just peek. Maybe you already know. I don't know. ACH, or acetylcholine, is an example of a direct messenger. So it opens the channels, cation channels, I'm not sure what that means, cation channels, for the Na plus and Ca plus to flow into and the K plus to flow out of a cell. Okay, so there's some movement in and out of the cell that acetylcholine is responsible for. Parasympathetic stimulation causes heartbeat to slow down, lowers blood pressure, constricts pupils, changes the lens for nearer vision, increases blood flow to the skin and viscera, stimulates glands to secrete saliva and mucus, and stimulates gut paralysis. So all the opposite things from the sympathetic responses. Contracts bladder and uterus, causes erection of the penis and the clitoris. So this is all when you're in this like relaxed, yummy kind of state, right? Plexus are complex webs of nerves and ganglia that affect the internal organs, particularly by controlling arterial blood flow, hence oxygen and nutrient supply. The location of the plexuses are associated with the chakra systems. So you can look this up. There is a plexus at the chakra points. All right, the cervical plexus contains nerves mainly connected to skin and muscles of the head and neck, but also contains phrenic nerves which run to the diaphragm. Okay, cervical, you're also getting the high heart chakra and the throat up here. All right, it says that also the cardiac plexus directly affects lungs and heart. The solar plexus is the largest in the body, involving the fight or flight activation and redirection of blood from digestive organs to brain and muscles. Solar plexus, going here, stimulates production of adrenaline, activates kidneys, and this is also going to affect the solar plexus chakra and the heart chakra. The heart chakra is fed by both these plexuses, all right, and also your digestive system. Pelvic plexus, so we're down in the pelvis, has lumbar and sacral spinal connections and is concerned with elimination and sexuality, also first and second chakra. Kundalini can be felt as bliss, tingle, and heat moving through these plexuses at various times. The medulla oblongata is part of the brainstem or autonomic brain at the top of the spinal cord. The central canal of the spinal cord continues into the fourth ventricle of the medulla. It is the medulla that the nerves from the two hemispheres cross over and head down the spine to control the opposite sides of the body. Okay, it is the medulla. That's where they cross. That's where the information from the brain hemispheres cross over and give you the opposite. The parasympathetic nerves that feed the visceral organs down to the intestines leaves the spinal cord from the cranial area. However, colon, urinary organs, and sex organs are parasympathetically fed by nerves leaving the sacrum area at the bottom of the spine. So we're basically just getting a rundown on the nervous system so that we can understand where this energy is affecting us when the cosmic energy comes in. So she's just breaking down the different parts of the nervous system here. So we'll just go a few more sections, okay? The substantia gelatinosa is the H-shaped gray matter in the spinal cord, which surrounds the central canal. This is where the nerve fibers carrying information from the peripheral to the central nervous system terminates, okay? The substantia gelatinosa is made up of unmyelinated neurons. They don't have myelin sheath, some of which inhibit pain signals by producing opioids. Since Kundalini invariably involves the sensation of bliss, part of the endorphin release, since Kundalini invariably involves the sensation of bliss, there should be a comma there, part of the endorphin releases could be from the gray matter in the spinal cord itself. because there's opiate production. Avram Goldstein, one of the first discoverers of endorphins, proposed that endorphins in the amygdala create a tingling down the spine and a shuddering discharge of emotion that we experience as a thrill. You know, when you get that. In the brain, a thin outer shell of cellular gray matter, the cortex, covers the cerebral hemisphere and clusters of the cellular gray matter in the center of the brain from the deep nuclei. A nucleus is a mass of nerve cell bodies and dendrites inside the central nervous system. Clusters of nerve cells outside the central nervous system are referred to as ganglion. Okay, so nucleus is inside and ganglion is outside the central nervous system, the main brain and spine. The locus cereculius in the floor of the fourth brain ventricle is an alarm center, which helps alert or attentiveness and governs arousal, fear, anxiety, and terror. So this is the locus cereculius, I think is how you say it. It has extensions of the adrenergic neurons, I'm so sorry, reaching into nearly every part of the cortex. And is thought to be instrumental in directing attention of the cortex. So it's governing arousal, fear, terror through that noradrenaline activity. Researchers have found both the locus cereculius and the amygdala and other regions of the limbic system to be practically saturated with short-lived opioid peptides called enkephalins. So they're just saturated with this short-lived opioid because they're about arousal, fear, anxiety, terror, okay, and attentiveness, like, Opiates, in response to physical injury, terror, and severe emotional stress. So now the paragraph heading is opiates, and then we got a little dash. In response to physical terror, injury, severe emotional stress, the amygdala, hypothalamus, brainstem, striatum, and related limbic system nuclei secrete enkephalins. That's what we just said, the short-lived opioid peptides, which are chain amino acids. Like corticosteroids, enkephalins are released as part of the fight or flight response and ensure that an animal or human can continue to battle or to successfully run away, although severely injured. So your body just keeps these enkephalins going so that you can keep moving if you need to. Enkephalins are a 5 amino acid protein chain, the smallest opioid to be used by the body. Although the enkephalin combination of aminos is found with endorphins, they actually come from a different precursor and have dissimilar distribution patterns. So they're not exactly an endorphin. When stained endorphin regions show up as definitive streaks, pathways or fibers, while enkephalins tend to show up as discrete dots. So they run different, they move different in the body. The strongest of the opioids is the 17-chain amino acid dynorphin. Dynorphin in the spinal cord helps processing sensory information. That's the strongest of the opioids. As well as the spinal cord, it's also found in parts of the pituitary gland, the hypothalamus, medulla, pons, and the midbrain. So all this dynorphin is found everywhere, and it's the strongest of the opioids, and it helps us process sensory information. So anything coming in is telling us. The 3 genera of opioid peptide endorphins, dynorphins, and enkephalins, so we have endorphins, dynorphins, and enkephalins, are used as hormones in the body and something more like neurotransmitters in the brain. They are inhibitory neurotransmitters, making it more difficult for the neuron membrane to become depolarized and fire off an electrical signal. So they're inhibitory. Okay, so they're making it hard for us to depolarize in that neuron, okay, in the neuron membrane. In this way, the endorphin system of nerves acts to inhibit other neuronal systems in the brain. So we're just like, hold on, something's happening. Like, pause, don't go crazy. Like, don't go shooting off. Like, listen. Sensory input, okay? Something's happening. Pain is happening, or need to run away, or sensory input. It's like making you listen, right? The effect of opiates is to inhibit the reaction of tissue to electrical stimulation. So you're not reacting as much. With this inhibitory action to slow down neuron firing, hold on. The racing electric activity would result in convulsion and death because it would be too much coming in. You just, like you'd die. So this is extremely important, these endorphins. The endorphins, slow breathing, reduce blood pressure, decrease sensitivity to pain, like you're going into slow motion, right? And time is stretching out. It's like the zone. Endorphins reduce smooth muscle contractions, thus causing smooth muscles to dilate, increasing blood flow. So maybe they don't tear as easily or break. Hypoxia or low oxygen creates acidosis stress, which increases beta endorphins as part of the parasympathetic response to achieve balance. So if you're not getting oxygen for any reason, this is also going to slow everything down so that you don't die. Long-term potentiation, which is abbreviated LTP, is the long-lasting strengthening of the connection between two nerve cells. Long-term potentiation. Like corticosteroids, enkephalins abolish LTP, that long-standing strengthening between neurons, okay? Abolishes them, and theta activity disrupt learning and memory and induce hippocampal seizure activity without convulsions, which is accompanied by abnormal high voltage EEG paroxysmal waves, which can last 15 to 30 minutes. Okay, this is the potency of the enkephalins, which remember is of the 5-chain amino acid, the smallest opioid. This is for in response to physical terror, severe emotional stress, and so forth. But this is the power of the enkephalins. They stop that long-lasting nerve communication, all right? Enkephalins also trigger hyperactivation of hippocampal pyramidal cells, neurons which normally display synaptic growth and dendritic proliferation in response to new learning. So you're going to have an increased ability to learn really fast what's going on. Like you have to take in information even quicker in the moments when these enkephalins are responding. Enkephalins also alter pre and post synaptic substrates, thereby injuring hippocampal neurons and producing hippocampal amnesia, as well as a state of dependent memory loss. So you don't want this to go on too long, because you might kind of just like forget what happened because it happened so fast and your body was doing it really fast to save your life. Basically, you don't always remember that. It's kind of like, what just happened? That's because of this process, is what she's saying. Myelination of nerves proceeds from the bottom to the top, back to the front, and left to right, okay? That's when you're getting new myelination of nerves. Bottom to top, back to front, left to right. And she says, Kundalini also follows this path of flow and development over the period of awakening. Okay, bottom to top, Kundalini, back to front, left to right. We tend to get the right body and right brain Kundalini effect during December and toward the end of one's awakening. Myelin is a fatty substance that includes acetylcholine. When we overwork the other neurotransmitters, we burn out our acetylcholine. Since the myelin sheath is what facilitates speed, because it's protective, it's insulating, speed and transmission of nerve impulses, the impairment of our myelin slows down our brain, because we just can't get the information. This is obviously a major contributor to spiritual burnout effect from excessive nerve activity during Kundalini, absolutely. So that means also not enough acetylcholine. Kundalini awakening is a method the body uses to promote new growth because after myelination finishes, it's harder to change or evolve the neuron system. So your body's pushing it to say, like, it needs more, it needs more, it needs more. Don't finish, just keep growing more. Kundalini is so outrageously pervasive that I am sure that not only is there a lot of neurons dying off, there's also demyelination and remyelination that occurs. Research will probably prove that there are major changes in the pattern of myelination resulting from a Kundalini awakening and the function we are left with in the end result of these changes. This serves as a good case for AQAL development practices, which I believe is quantum learning, and experiences during an awakening, because if we fail to use it, we lose it. In other words, substantiation equals agency, praxis, or use. So as the information is coming in, we want to try to access as much of that as we can as soon as we can so we don't lose it. So we want to process it, create the neural pathways, try to understand it, soak it in, all of that. That's why the quantum learning. I'm not really sure exactly how that works, but I do that in my own way. And the last part we're going to read, just this little section. Glial cells, G-L-I-A-L, glial cells. They perform a variety of functions in the central nervous system and make up 50% of the central nervous system by volume, 95 to 98% by number. This is huge, and I've never even heard this word, glial cell. Neurons are the active or functional cells of the nervous system and carry electrical signals. Glial cells are small supporting cells that do not carry electrical systems. So notice how much of it needs to be protective, needs to be helping. Well, there's a little bit more on the glial. In support of our nervous glial cells, nourishment, she says, glial cells attach neurons to blood vessels and supply nutrients and oxygen to neurons, maintain ionic balance, and help control the chemical composition of fluids surrounding neurons. The L-arginine for nitric oxide production is mainly supplied from the glial cells, and they produce cerebral spinal fluid. So they do tons of important things. They're almost the entire composition of the central nervous system. So big deal, these glial cells. They also insulate. So glial produces the fatty insulating myelin sheath around the axons to insulate one neuron from another, to form a matrix surrounding neurons and hold them in place. This matrix serves to isolate synapses, limiting the dispersion of transmitter substance release. So these glials have a really important job. Phagocytosis, the glia acts as scavengers, removing debris after injury or neuronal death. Here they're acting like vultures, right? Scavengers are coming in and they're just getting all, as you're going through metamorphosis, they're just coming in and I'm like eating it up, but they're also helping insulate and they're also feeding. Like, wow, these are very diverse cells. Phagocytosis occurs when the astrocyte contacts a piece of neural debris with its process and then pushes itself against the debris, eventually engulfing and digesting it. Okay, and then we have glycosis. Aerobic glycosis in the central nervous system involves interaction between neurons and astrocytes. The entrance of glucose into the central nervous system from capillaries occurs primarily through astrocytes. They sound like little astronauts, right? Astrocytes are strategically placed between capillaries and neurons and play an essential role in neuronal energy metabolism, and brain glycogen is localized in astrocytes in brain tissue. So the brain gets its energy and everything through these little astrocytes. Astrocytes provide nourishment to neurons by receiving glucose from the capillaries. They first metabolize the glucose to its metabolic intermediate lactate and secrete lactate, releasing it into the extracellular fluid surrounding neurons. Sounds like they're being little mamas and feeding them. The neurons receive the lactate from the extracellular fluid and transport it to their mitochondria to use as a primary substrate for oxidative metabolism to create energy. So all this is going on inside the central nervous system, and then that central nervous system is going up and is feeding all the brain tissues, right? In this process, astrocytes store a small amount of glycogen, which stays on reserve for times when the metabolic rate of neurons in that area are high. So even like holding a little reserve, like extra mama milk. Neuronal activity regulates the rate of aerobic glycosis by a mechanism involving glutamate release from neurons and glutamate uptake into astrocytes. Glutamate is the primary neurotransmitter released by excitatory synapses in the central nervous system. Glutamate is taken up by astrocytes by an Na positive co-transporter. Na positive influx into the astrocytes stimulates the astrocytic sodium pump, which produces ADP. Increased levels of astrocytic ADP will stimulate glycosis and lactate transport into neurons. So you've got this whole little communication system going on, and glutamate is super important. Lactate uptake by neurons will stimulate neural oxidative ATP production. Glucose can be incorporated into lipids, proteins, and glycogen, and it is also the precursor of certain neurotransmitters such as G-aminobutyric acid, which is GABA, glutamate, and acetylcholine. So this is all important. This L-glutamate, hugely important for your awakening and for the brain's food. This is now the last part I'll read. We're pushing 40 minutes here. I hope you're hanging on with me. This is a lot of data, I know, and maybe it's making your head explode. It is kind of making mine, but I think it's important to bring consciousness to these parts of ourselves, because even if we aren't retaining all this information, like it could just be washing through you while I'm talking, and that's totally fine. But it is bringing conscious awareness, even for a microsecond, to all of these functions, which raises your level of consciousness just listening. So just reading it is enlightening. So we'll end with the Schwann cells, because then we're in the enteric brain and we're not going to do the stomach today. So let's finish with the nervous system here and the brain. Schwann cells support the peripheral nervous system, while the central nervous system is supported by glial cells, okay? So Schwann cells are in the peripheral, like fingers and, all that. As the peripheral nerves form, the Schwann cells migrate peripherally from the spinal ganglia, parallel to the axons, and encase them with their cytoplasm. The myelin sheath is created by a synthesis and a wrapping of Schwann cell plasma membrane around the axon. During the breakdown of damaged axons, Schwann cells During the breakdown of damaged axon, Schwann cells participate in the myelin phagocytosis, so eating them up, prior to the recruitment of macrophages. So we have to be having this metamorphosis of breaking down the old myelin structure and structuring anew. These Schwann cells, they participate. They produce heat shock protein only when they've transformed into these myelin-eating cells from myelinating cells. I'm convinced that during the die-off, some axons do die, and Schwann cells would change to their phagocytic mode in order to absorb the dead axons. Research might find the whole neurons die off at this time rather than just certain dendrite connections. So this is full-on support in all ways. They're creating myelin support, but they're also helping eat, consume, digest the old stuff, right? So this is very important. That's where we're going to end today. Thank you for joining me and bringing consciousness to your nervous system with me today. And yeah, I invite you back again to explore more of Jana Dixon's book, The Biology of Kundalini. I love reading and discussing this with you. I hope that you are enjoying it too. Play it in the background while you're doing something else, or sit and listen. Allow this activation to occur so that not only do you know consciously what's going on with the awakening, but subconsciously, and maybe even more important than consciously right now, because it's a lot of information. The first time I read this, I feel like I didn't even read it. Like I couldn't even comprehend anything I was reading. It was like, you've ever read a book and you're just like, I don't even know, but you read it anyway. Like I felt like I needed to know, but I couldn't comprehend. I couldn't put all the pieces together. So maybe that's happening to you and you're hoping it'll change, but you might just listen the first time, and that is starting to turn something on, because reading it again, now all the pieces start to connect, and it's having that subconscious, that memory that's not quite to the forefront where you're putting it together. That helps support the process, because everything's a bleed through from the subconscious. Everything you've been doing and you've been seeing in the world is a bleed through from previous subconscious mind stuff. So when we clean that out, through our awakening practices, our yoga, our meditation, our breathing, our cleansing, so forth, now we've pulled some of that stuff to the forefront in order to integrate it and do something with it. Now there still is a subconscious mind, and if we don't want it to remain completely empty, we want to allow new material to enter there, something that's support to us. And that's what doing a lot of practices like yoga nidra and listening to high frequency audio books and texts, it puts new information into your subconscious mind that actually is driving your behavior. And that's why a lot of listening to self-help books and stuff can be good, because it's rewriting your subconscious mind talk, how you're telling yourself. And so this too is helping us to rewire our minds and our nervous system to remember who we truly are, remember and be aware of what happens with the influx of this God force in us, so that we can be more conscious God beings. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time. This is Deja Bliss. Subscribe and share, and come back for more.